So we've heard about the size and scope of the challenge that is healthy aging. And we know we have to change the game if we're going to turn that challenge into opportunity. We heard this morning about the critical need for systemic change and systems thinking, and that is really important to align incentives and set a mindset. But we need tools. We need new ways of diagnosing and predicting healthy versus unhealthy aging. We need preventative therapies, and of course we need new treatments for diseases of aging. In order to get those here developed and sent out to people, we need people. People to develop those, to conceive of them, and to turn those tools into reality. We're going to meet today some people who are devoting their career to envisioning and building those solutions. Our panelists come from diverse backgrounds and bring unique perspectives and pathways. We'll talk about their startup journeys and how they see the road evolving. I'll tell you a little bit about each of our panelists. To my left, Dr. Greg Bailey, as you heard, co-founder and executive chairman of Juvenescence, a company developing therapeutics to modify diseases of aging. He's a serial entrepreneur, company founder and financier of several highly successful biotechnology companies which have achieved over $28 billion in value. Dr. Anne Baleen is founder and CEO of Rejuvenate Biomed, a clinical stage biotechnology company which uses a unique discovery platform to discern drug combinations to treat diseases of aging. She has over 20 years' experience in drug development spanning research, development, and the market, and began her career as a PhD scientist. Christian Fortney is co-founder and CEO of BioAge, a biotechnology company developing treatments to extend healthy lifespan by targeting the molecular causes of aging. The company has a discovery platform which queries a proprietary database of human samples matched with detailed health records to map key pathways. She's a computational biologist by training. Anuj Gagar is co-founder and CEO of Arrive Bio, which is developing a platform to untangle the complex physiology underlying diseases of aging. Prior to founding Arrive, he was vice president of clinical research at Gilead, where he was responsible for the development of the global industry-leading suite of treatments for severe liver disease. And Jerry McLaughlin is CEO of Life Biosciences, which is developing innovative therapies to transform how we treat diseases by targeting aging biology. He has 30 years of experience in the biopharmaceutical industry, both as a CEO and in senior commercialization roles at companies such as Merck, where he was responsible for the launch of several blockbuster drugs. So with those different backgrounds and those different approaches, I'm going to start by asking each of the panelists to tell us, why is this field exciting to you? Why did you start or join your current company? Right.
So my journey, and I perceive this as a journey, started probably 12 years ago at the Milken Conference when I met a gentleman named Luigi Fontana, who's the #1 scientist in the world in caloric restriction. And he said that that was the #1 way to live longer, healthy. Next year, I met Walter Longo, who said you don't have to do chronic caloric restriction. You could once every 3 months, if you're a normal weight, do 5 days, 800 calories. If you're very slim, you should do it once every 6 months. And then met Walter Bortz, who's the head of gerontology at Stanford, and he had a mathematical formula for how long you live, and his main component to that was exercise. There's nothing magical about those. So then you think about it must be doing something on a cellular level. And then you discover that the scientists you're going to hear from later were actually figuring that out. And so it became obvious that there was going to be this opportunity to work on these pathways. And it was almost a responsibility, because I have been fortunate historically with 2 other drugs, to try and bring the money and the people together to start working in this area. And so I've been very fortunate in putting that together at Juvenescence.
Fantastic. Anne, tell us about your journey.
Mine is a very personal story. So I was working at Johnson & Johnson for 17 years, and we did great stuff. We brought compounds to the market, oncology, neurology, inflammation. And then actually my father started to suffer from age-related diseases, so I got a little bit frustrated because I didn't know how to help him, because one would pop up and there would just multiple come on. So I started to look into the biology of aging. And fortunately, there has been done so much in the last decades on the biology of aging. And we could clearly see that there are specific mechanisms which are important in all these diseases. So the metaphor that I typically use is if you look at the world map and you look at all the countries and you give them a color, you have a wonderful, beautiful mosaic. If you now color them based on the language that you speak, the mosaic is still very beautiful, but very different. And you'll see that there are languages that are being spoken in different, even continents. It's very much the same that I kind of started to realize when we look at organs. Every organ has its specifics, but there is also a lot of commonalities in there. So if we can tackle those commonalities, we will not only be able to tackle the age-related diseases, but really keep people healthy for a longer period of time. So it's my personal tribute to my father that I founded this company, and I will keep going.
Fantastic. Kristen.
I've been excited about the potential of aging science for a very long time for the reasons that we've discussed earlier today, that therapies, when they work here, can improve health span, can add a decade or more of healthy life. And for that reason, I went into the field as a PhD student and also for my postdoc. So I trained as a scientist in this area. And I was always particularly studying the human example. There already are examples of a lot of people who live long lives and age well. So for example, for my postdoc at Stanford, I got to work on the genetic sequence of humans who live to be over 100 or over 110, which are these living examples that we can all live healthier longer, and where I think there's a lot of opportunity to unlock important biology to help enable all of us to age better. And it was really that same kind of focus that led to my co-founding BioAge with Eric Morgan, my co-founder. This idea that if we study large populations of humans, some of whom age poorly, others who age well, we can learn new mechanisms to target. And that's our approach to discovering and executing on targets at BioAge. And we've gone all the way now from mapping in human data sets to our first clinical data for some of these mechanisms just a couple months ago.
Thank you. Anuj, you've brought truly life-changing therapies to people. What drew you to this area?
Yeah, that's a great question. And actually, if you told me even 5 years ago I'd be in the aging space, I would have probably laughed at myself from back then. And I'm the opposite of Kristen in that I am not sort of long-term in the field, and I'm infectious disease trained and really fell in love through the work on viral hepatitis on what you can do on global diseases that have major societal impacts when you get the science right. And when you get the science right and get a really good therapy, suddenly you can make really, really large impacts around the globe. And was fortunate at Gilead also to work on how to make drugs available globally. So not just have a European and a US-based drug, but how do you get them into countries that otherwise couldn't afford the price tags that are in the Western world. So when I looked at that and said, well, where can we start applying the same principles? Where can we have same societal impact, work on large global diseases, and work towards a big impact if we get the science right? This field stood out as a place where you could do that. And what I had seen at Gilead and other places was there wasn't as much of an embracement, as Anne is pointing out, of the whole organism and how organs are communicating with one another. And if we build systems that can study that, then we're more likely to get at the complexity of aging, which is really not a single organ, but it's an entirety of an organism that's aging at the same time.
Terrific. And Jerry, you're perhaps the most commercially minded, business-minded person here. What's in this for you?
Well, I'm the newcomer to the group, and just in the last year and a half. And the way I arrived in this aging field was our last company was acquired. And after 30-some years in this industry, I took stock and looked back and the career and then looking forward where I wanted to go for, now we say, the next 30 years, right? Where I want to take my career. And there were two main issues in my life that I think are really important besides raising my children, and that's the sustainability of the planet, and then as a trained economist as well, the aging population and that impact on societies. And given that I was already in the field, it made natural sense to move into this field of aging biology. And the reason I ended up at Life Biosciences, when I read the papers and the science, just absolutely groundbreaking, like nothing I'd ever seen before. Incredible inventions at multiple institutions within the company. And in my career, I've had the pleasure and really the excitement of taking inventions and developing them and turning them into innovations to bring to patients. And that's what I want to dedicate the rest of my career to. So that's point number 2. And then finally, I was trained at Merck. And there was a saying by George Merck, the founder, in 1891, that medicine is for the patient, for the people. And if we focus on the patient, the profits will follow. And we are all in commercial enterprises here, and they are not mutually exclusive, helping populations and also being a profitable enterprise. And that's what really excites me, that the opportunity to do both here.
Really inspiring, all of you, fantastic. Now, as CEOs of biotechnology companies, you are truly the sharp end of the spear in driving new ideas into therapies. And we all know that there's a lot of bumps on those roads. So, Kristen, what are the biggest hurdles you've encountered in your journey, and how are you addressing them?
I think there's a lot of hurdles and also opportunities that come with the fact that this is all new, right? This is new science. This is new from a biotech perspective as well. Some of the first therapies are in the clinic today. I expect vastly more in the coming years. And one of the unique challenges to aging, and I call it really a challenge and an opportunity, is the fact that, you know, as we've touched on earlier today, so aging is this big driver of all these different things that ultimately kill you, whether it's heart disease or Alzheimer's or cancer. It's a long list, right? And what that means from a practical perspective is that these targets that are important for aging and the drugs that hit them have wide applicability in different organ systems to different diseases. And the question, if you're, you know, in our shoes, you're an aging biotech CEO, is where do I take that first, right? It's not necessarily as simple as if you're an oncology company and there's like that straight line there. So you have to do a bigger exercise to figure out where to go first from a clinical validation perspective. At the same time, I think it's an opportunity because you can be really effective there too. You can think which clinical indication, which disease will give me the most efficient proof of mechanism for that disease, but also hopefully teach us something about the broader impact on aging as well.
Anuj, same question to you.
Yeah, there's quite a few, as you guys know, but I think when I think of some of the major hurdles, they're not very exciting ones, but I think they're important ones. One is kind of the words we use to talk about what we do, and then the second would be just patience. So on the first one, when we were working on viral hepatitis and trying to get curative therapies for hepatitis B, we had to bring together the regulators from the FDA, EMEA, societies, academicians, pharma companies, all together to align on terminology. What do we do? What are we looking to do? How do we describe ourselves? And it may seem mundane, but what it does is it really helps in communicating all of our visions to our stakeholders, and there's many stakeholders out there, and when they hear a consistent message, and even today we heard, you know, are we age-related therapeutics, are we aging therapeutics, are we health span therapeutics? I think to the audience in here, we understand what that means, but when you go outside these walls, they get very confusing to people. So I think aligning on terms is something that we've come to be a problem when we talk to investors or other folks out there. And then I would just say patience also, that we are attracting as a field a lot of non-traditional capital. So folks who are in the tech world coming in, or private wealthy folks coming in. And it's a different beast in the biotech world, and I think there has to be an understanding that the promises that we make should be within the scope of what we can deliver. And if we can't, if we're making promises greater than what we can deliver in the short term, I worry we would lose these investors over time because they may not be ready for what can be a bumpy road in biotech. So while I hope all the first therapeutics work, there's a chance they may not. And we want to make sure those funders are around so we can take the learnings from the first ones and then apply them to the next generation of therapies.
That's a fantastic point. And Greg, I'm going to ask you to follow up on that. How do you see navigating that conversation among impatient people, impatient capital, and the inevitable reality that all the companies you've been involved with have had challenges and setbacks along the way?
Yeah, so it's interesting. When I was trying to raise money for the first company, which is called Innovators, you know, people say, "Oh, I don't do biotech. I don't understand it. I don't know how to do it." So to Injur's comment about communication, you know, very, very important that you can take it to that level and explain it. The other thing, and I said to them, "Do you invest in mining?" Many of them say, yeah, I invest in mining or oil. And I said, you know, you drill the hole. If there's oil there, your company's worth a lot of money. If there's no oils there, your stock goes down. I said, it's no difference in biotech. We run a clinical trial. If the data is positive, your stock goes up 10x. And if it fails, you know, your stock's going down. So where I was very fortunate in every one of the companies I've been involved with is we always did 10 drugs. Because the chance of a positive phase 2 clinical trial, which a number of my colleagues here are in phase 2 trials, is you have a 22 to 54% chance of success. The 22, and I realize that's quite a delta, the 22 is for oncology and autoimmune, 54 is for insulin and antibiotics, because if it worked in phase 1, it's going to work in phase 2. If you can get 33% and the return is over 10 to 15 times your money, how long would you play at Monaco or a gambling casino where every third hand you win 10 times your money? And when you begin to put it in that context, it's easy for them, the investor, to grasp the opportunity. And so that's our job, is to communicate that opportunity to the patient. And the other thing with anti-aging is, you know, prostate cancer is 240,000 men in Europe, 235,000 in the US. But you know, 8 billion people are getting older. So it's a whole different metric when you're doing the DCF.
Thank you for that. For any of you who need a hint, the one thing I'll say is, if you play the game long enough in biology and biotechnology, you will win. You will find a new drug if you're smart. If you play at the casino long enough, the odds are actually stacked against you.
Yeah, because you don't win 10 times your money every third hand.
Right. Leaving the math aside. We've heard that this field is nascent. It exists, but it's in some ways in its infancy. What do you think the field really needs more of? And I'll start with you, Anne.
Well, there are indeed a couple of things that we could need more of, and if I can choose a couple. One is definitely the obvious one, investment, right? And I think that we are now, in the meantime, starting to speak that same language so that we can explain very well to investors that this is not so much different in investing in our world, in the biotech world, than investing in a single indication. We are now not looking at one indication. The data will tell us to which disease we will be evolving. So definitely the VCs that are agnostic for an indication are understanding what we're doing, because the data have the benefit of both long-term vision on aging, quick benefits really coming from the age part. The other thing is, of course, people, education. I'm still old school trained, so apologies for the youngsters here. But we were trained like every organ, very organ specifically, and we do know that there are these common mechanisms that I alluded to before. We see now a much more of that cross-communication being educated at schools, but also involving not only scientists, but engineers, mathematicians, statisticians. We see now communities around universities being built to bring together all these different disciplines and have that cross-fertilization. And the other thing is definitely the globality of it. It's a global issue, having the possibility to have all these exchanges, so I'm so happy to be here. I already talked to a couple of very nice people over here with great ideas, and how we can bring students from one place to the other and exchange the knowledge, because the young generation is the future.
Excellent. Jerry, what's your perspective on that?
So I think capital is a big thing, but I think the conundrum is capital and elevating and advancing the science and the rigor around the science. You know, and there's the old question, I need capital to advance my science, but investors want to see the results. And one of the things I think we are doing as a field, and I know everyone sitting here, is we are holding ourselves to the highest standard. And I call that the classic biotech standard in terms of the rigor of the science, taking these inventions once again and repeating the experiments, building upon the knowledge we have today and making advances and taking a stepwise approach to reducing risk. And as we do that, and as we do that as a whole, as a field, it will attract not only existing investors, but a broader swath of investors as well. And I think that's an important component, and that's something we preach internally at our company, is really to elevate and produce the best science. We may not always like the result. There is risk in our business, but we need to produce strong evidence and de-risk our programs going forward in a fashion that is suitable to not only investors, but then brings large pharmaceutical companies to the table for potential partnerships and acquisitions. And that's something throughout my career has always ruled the day, was the evidence, the data, and the robustness of the data.
Anuj, I'm curious, you've been in different therapeutic areas, and this is a new one. As you enter this, what do you see as what the field really needs more of?
Yeah, well, I agree with what everyone said already. I think rigor is an important one. But I think we need to bring some of the work that's been done in other fields, such as for surrogate biomarkers. This is something I think we're all searching for as really critical. But I can say from my experience in the liver world, it is really hard and takes a very large cooperation across multiple companies, multiple academicians over multiple years to be able to get to true surrogate biomarkers. And just for everybody, for you to understand that surrogate biomarkers are what we can use to make trials shorter. So when we're dealing with long-term treatments for long-term diseases, they can be very, very long, and that will hurt our field in the end if we always have to run a 5-year study for every indication. But I think if we can get to those biomarkers, but it's the rigor that it takes to get those that we need to bring to the field.
That brings up a great topic, which is we've heard that it's often said, and we hear all the time, regulators don't think of aging as a disease. And of course, most of us don't think of aging per se as a disease anyways. But nonetheless, as we develop therapies that really address underlying causes of how aging causes trouble, how can we work and companies work with regulators to revision and reimagine how we do clinical trials and how we approach the regulatory milieu? Anne, do you want to start?
Oh, sure. It's my hot topic, right? I think we shouldn't blame them. I mean, they have their rules, and that's how the rule is being played. And they actually asked us, and it's our task, to help them to get to the new rules. So we will need to help them and show them that, yes, a compound can have an impact on different organs, because that's still a little bit how everything is structured on an organ level. And if we help to generate the data, and it's all about the data will tell them where to go, then we will get there. We know that FDA is open to look at the data, they're supportive to this approach. The same EMA on the same side. It's a little bit different between Europe and US on where the accents are, but basically there's willingness. And I think if there's willingness and if there's the power from all of us to generate the data, we will get there. In the meantime, we can still play perfectly fine within the rules which are currently there, providing the benefit to the subjects and the patients. And already, like Kristen alluded to as well, we will continue to collect more information, not only just focus on that one disease, but bringing in the totality of the data. I'm very positive about it.
Good. Kristen, do you have a perspective on that?
Yeah, definitely. That's something I care a lot about as well. And as Anne said too, right, if you're a small biotech company, you really want to you try to stay inside the box, right? As a company, you try to do one impossible thing at a time. So, developing a new medicine is already very challenging, and regulatory reform is very hard, right? So how we address this at BioAge within the company is we focus on very particular diseases, but at the same time, we look at broad biomarker panels in our patients to try to learn if there's a broader aging effect. And I think that in the longer term, regulatory reform can really unlock a lot of opportunity here. And as Anne touched on, that's something where it's really important for companies to work together, and really organizations like Hevolution to contribute to as well, because that's, I think, where the future is going to be.
Great. So regulators are important. There's other stakeholders, and I know I'm going to hit you with a question that we haven't pre-talked about. But as you think about other stakeholders in our ecosystem, people and institutions involved in what makes a drug become a drug, what other allies should we be courting, and how else should we be advocating and maybe building potential changes to the way we do business, if you will? I'll start with Jerry.
Yeah, I think that one of the areas of the patient advocacy groups, I think they have an ever-increasing power and influence, and we're here to serve them. And I think partnering with patient advocacy groups, because we're already partnering with investors and academic research facilities and others, but really taking this to the patient. They are the end benefit, the benefactors of our work, and getting them involved. We've seen in history, in the biotech industry, the power of specific disease groups in MS and other areas that have affected radical change. And so as we move forward, making them part of the journey, I think could be really influential.
Greg, what's your perspective?
I'm going to combine the two questions, if I may. So the stakeholders, a lot of the people who are in this room, what Victor's doing, the National Institute, is very important. His Royal Highness, and His Royal Highness who are just here, they're getting the political will to change it. As the video showed, we got a dilemma coming up. And, and then we have the people who are working in public health. So all of that has, we have the right people. You just have to empower them. You have to make the people aware this is happening now. These aren't drugs and therapies that are going to come in 30 years. These are going to come much faster than people think. And so how do we bring all of you into this mix to empower us? Because we have a responsibility because of the profound effect it'll have on society, let alone yourselves, as far as how you live. So, I would bring all the stakeholders together and to communicate that message with language that everybody can understand and take the excitement of it forward.
Anuj.
Yeah, I feel like I'm always taking the boring answer here, but I think at every stage in development, you always want to involve not the next stakeholder, but like two stakeholders down the road. And we're getting to the point now with folks in clinical development where payers need to be part of the discussion, because in the end, they need to have an education done for them about what this therapy is, how it's going to be used, why it's beneficial, and why they should actually pay for it. This is not true with every country, but I think most countries now will be looking at value-based pricing, but also from private insurance, and they need to come into the discussion early so we can take that time to educate them, because otherwise we're going to have a great product, patients are going to want it, and no one will reimburse it, and then no one actually benefits from it. So I think that's, again, not the most fun group to work with, but an important one.
Clearly. Kristen, you come from such a unique biologic and intellectual background. Are there aspects of the way we develop data and the kind of data we're looking at that can bring stakeholders in and teach them something new?
Well, I think that we can learn a lot about aging biology, but also clinical de-risking, clinical translation from the right kinds of data sets. And we've seen this happen in drug development with, Decode in Iceland or the UK Biobank, right? Like those are actually really valuable resources. And, what we believe, and we've invested a lot in this at BioAge, is that, as we know, right? Like human aging unfolds over decades. It doesn't happen overnight. And you really need longitudinal data and biobanks and, the right measuring technologies to be able to figure out what's going on there. And that's to unlock targets for aging, but it's also to unlock biomarkers that can be useful in the clinic. And where I think we are as a field today, which is new, is that we now have the tools to ask and answer these questions. Like, for example, proteomics is a really important technology for biomarkers for drug discovery. Today, you can go into a human blood sample and measure 7,000 proteins. A decade ago, you could do maybe 1/10 of that with mass spec, right? So this is all very new, and I think it's enabling translation of aging into the clinic in new ways.
Excellent. So let's start looking forward. I'm going to ask each of the panelists a series of questions in kind of almost in order. So first, where do you see this field going in 5 years and 15 years? We'll start with Greg.
Hopefully the regulatory body is embracing this, which will open so many doors for my associates here. I think there's so much excitement coming. I think that it'll be interesting to see when quantum computing comes, because I think that that's sort of the key to unlocking cellular aging. and then you'll literally be able to mitigate that effect. Clearly, we need to address Alzheimer's. Nobody wants to live to 120 if you have Alzheimer's for the last 40 years of your life. And then regeneration is going to be, what Jerry and David Sinclair are doing. With their epigenetic reprogramming, our scientists were able to cut off the limb of a living entity and regrow the limb. We published that January 6, 2022. So, it's going to be staggering how this is going to have the effects that were alluded to this morning in the changes on society, and how policymakers are going to have to conceive this. And it's extraordinary. I'm excited about being here because the Saudi Arabia, I think, can punch way above their weight, like when they beat the world champions in football this year. So, this change can happen anywhere, and if the change is here with the regulatory basis, the United States and Europe can't not follow. It's just so you have the opportunity to create a cascade of momentum.
Fantastic. Anne, your thought?
In 5 years, I'm always very concrete, you know me, right? More of this, for sure. Creating the awareness is extremely important, not only focusing on what we do on the scientific elements, but everything that comes with it, to really show people that we're taking this very serious. This is not just something we do for fun. This is serious business. And in 5 years, I think people will already see the first data coming out. We will have in 5 years data that show that we can impact multiple age-related diseases with one compound or one combination in our case. We will have data available much more, like Kristen already said, on the biomarkers, but also validation. We really need to have the validation so that they can become surrogate markers. I have seen, and we all know, there are so many really great initiatives ongoing right now, things that have been mentioned already today, ICOPE, but there are also studies like SPRINT. There are really international, global interest in bringing it all together. So in 5 years, I think we will have made a huge progress. These surrogate markers will for sure also help us when we bring products to the market to show that the compound works, which is beneficial for the reimbursement. So yeah.
And how about 15 years?
In 15 years, I think we will all do what we do with our car, but we will just have something on top of us that will give us a heads up, like your mitochondrial health is low. You have a problem on autophagy. You have a problem here or there, but we can solve it. For you, in this case, this might be beneficial to do, and another person might have something else that's beneficial to do. I know this is probably not 15 years and a little bit more than that, but I'm sure we can do it. If we can do it with cars, why cannot we just take care of ourselves a little bit better than we do?
Excellent. Kristen?
Yeah, I think the 5 to 15-year window is a really interesting one. I've been in this field since 2007 when I started my PhD, and in a way, there's more activity in this space, more science, more biotech than ever before, but it's still early days, right? I think it's still very much tip of the iceberg. There are going to be a lot of different targets that work, and we're only just beginning to prosecute on them. So in 5 years, I agree with Anne, I think there's going to be clinical data that that everyone will agree on, where you are targeting a basic aging mechanism and you're having a curative effect on disease with the potential for much more. And what I think that means in a 15-year period is that that's going to unlock so much more opportunity. This is really just the beginning right now, but once there's that clinical validation for the aging hypothesis, I think large pharma is going to get interested. They're going to start spending money. I think regulators can't ignore it anymore, right? There's patients groups getting involved. So I think the field is going to be growing tremendously during that period after the first proof.
Anuj?
Yeah, I think I agree. I think 5 years would be wonderful that and the first approved therapy that is not for an aging indication, but developed from aging science, which I think is what we all do, which is we study aging as the key to unlock the mysteries of disease. But the first ones, and maybe it's someone on the stage here, will have the one that's approved in 5 years. And I think the other part is building out kind of what's missing in the global data sets from an equity perspective. So do we have enough data representation of African populations, Mideast populations, Asian populations? And we will be bringing those data sets, I think, into the scientific research environment so that we can then make sure that we are not biased in the data that we see because of just where we happen to be studying right now. So I think that's the next 5-year window. And then, I think 15 years is we now have validated surrogate biomarkers, and clinical development then accelerates in that after 15 years, because now we have shorter studies that can be run on true aging indications. And I think it will take about a decade to get those surrogate biomarkers really approved by everyone, but I think that's what we can look for after.
Jerry, your perspective.
Some more thoughts, but I'll take it from a commercial or a business perspective and how it supports the overall vision for healthy longevity for all in 2050. I think what you have here, we are the advanced scouts, right? We're taking the risk, and we're developing medicines and therapeutics to help patients. And I think in 5 years, I really think we will have medicines on the market that are attacking some of these issues of aging that we heard earlier today. We need more productive seniors. We're going to be expected to work until in our 80s, and we're going to need to have good vision. We're going to need to have good cognitive function. We're going to have good muscle mass to be able to get around. And we're going to start to address some of those issues. And I think that will only serve to support the overall vision here for healthy longevity for all. So I think that's 5 years. And then I think that brings in the broader pharmaceutical industry. Having come from there, they watch full weight. They are looking now and they're examining. They're just looking for early signs of success. And I think that will be the tipping point for broad entry into the space. And then if I fast forward to 15 years, we'll be a normal biotech supplier for a broader industry of aging science. And at that point, I think you'll see great competition and great investment, not only in the products, but then in the talent and the individuals coming to this space. And this will become front and center as a mainstream category in the broader pharma and biotech industry.
Well, thank you. So I hope you will agree that these are passionate, highly competent, and really visionary entrepreneurs who are at the forefront of taking all the things that we know we need to do and taking all the science that's being developed and turning them into new therapies. And I really look forward to seeing you all, following you all, and working with you as we take those dreams, make them projects that are boring because all we have to do is make it happen and it'll work out, and get to the 1 out of 10 that really works. So thank you all. Really appreciate it. Wonderful panel.